Hi there, my name is Rhouela Francisco, and today we will be talking about the nature and function of language. What is language? Now, if you ask a random stranger on the street, he or she might tell you that it is used in communication or that language uses words or phrases and sounds to convey meaning and all of those things. Yes, they are true, but as a language teacher, it is a crime to only stick to one definition of language. That is why, as we go along our discussion, we will be knowing about the different definitions of language according to groups of experts and dictionaries all across the globe. Now, in modern linguistics, Carroll teaches that a language is a structured system of arbitrary vocal sounds and sequences of sounds which is used in interpersonal communication, and which rather exhaustively catalogs the things, events, and processes of human experience. While social scientists tells us that language is an open system interacting with, changed by, and is changing its environment as part of culture. The humanness of language and its place in human society is one of the most necessary and complex of all social skills. Transformationalists, spearheaded by Chomsky, view language as a system that relates meaning to substance. Language is a mental phenomenon. It is innate. Man has the genetically imparted ability for language learning. That means from the moment a child is born, he or she already has the potential capabilities for language learning. While according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, language is a systematic means of communicating ideas or feelings by the use of conventionalized signs, sounds, gestures, or marks having understood meaning. Random House Dictionary tells us that language is any set or system of linguistic symbols as used in more or less uniform fashion by a number of people who are thus enabled to communicate intelligibly with one another. While Wardo views language as a system of arbitrary, vocal symbols used for human communication. While according to Finocchiaro, language is a system of arbitrary vocal symbols which permit all people in a given culture or other people who have learned the system of that culture to communicate or to interact. Other common definitions found in textbooks include the following concepts: the generativity or creativity of language, the presumed primacy of speech over writing, and the universality of language among human beings. Finally, here are some important points that we have gathered from the previous discussion about language. Firstly, language is used for communication. Secondly, language is essentially human, although possibly not limited to humans. Third, language is a set of arbitrary symbols that may be vocal or visual. Fourth, the symbols have conventionalized meanings to which they refer. Fifth, language is systematic and generative. Sixth, language operates in a speech community or culture. Now, without it, people among the community cannot communicate with each other. Now, let's move on to the theories about the nature of language. Now, we will only be talking about the surface definition or the surface concepts of these theories because later on, the next reporters will be talking about them one by one. The first theory is the behaviorist or the empiricist theory, which is proposed by Leonard Bloomfield, B.F. Skinner, and Charles Fries. Now here are the basic concepts or the important details that we should note about the behaviorist theory. Firstly, it tells us that language is arbitrary. Second, it tells us that language is a system of habits. Third, it tells us that language is acquired behavior through conditioning and reinforcement. Fourth, it tells us that language is a surface structure. Now moving on to the rationalist, cognitivist, or mentalistic theory by Noam Chomsky. Now it tells us that language is a mental process, a creative construction process. It tells us that language is ruled, governed behavior. The speaker, hearer has internalized the rules of language. And there is a universal grammar in language at highly abstract level. All languages must share key characteristics. And lastly, a language has a deep structure and a surface structure. Now, knowing only those two theories, we can already see some differences between the two of them. The nativist theory by Eric Lindbergh points out that language is an innate or an inborn capacity of man, and that man has LAD, the language acquisition device, and language is species specific. Lastly is the social linguistic theory by Delheims and Michael Holliday. Now, in social linguistic theory, it points out three major things. First is the communication theory, and second, language is not only a set of rules of formation, but also a set of rules for use of language. And third, the pragmatic theory. Now here is a visual representation of the communication theory. In pragmatic theory by John Oller, the participants in a conversation should have a shared knowledge or a presupposition. Here, language has two elements: the factive or cognitive element, which is the use of language through words, phrases, and sentences, and the emotive or affective element, which is the attitudinal element, which is man's outlook about others and his nonverbal communication. Language gives man another line of continuity, which makes it possible for us human beings to preserve culture and accumulate knowledge. Truly, language marks the birth of man, and in that sense, one might interpret the opening words of St. John's Gospel that says, "In the beginning, there was language." Some languages are used by many people, millions of people, and may even serve as a way of communicating internationally. And some others are used by just a small number of people in a community. In each language community, language is differentiated. And so at this time, we want to ask ourselves, what are the common characteristics or features of language? Here are the common characteristics of language. Number 1, recursion. Number 2, arbitrary. Number 3, productive or creative. Number 4, social phenomenon. And number 5, complex. In recursion, sentences may be produced with other sentences inside them. This may be done, for example, by a process known as relativization, or the use of relative clauses. For example, this is the boy that found the dog that chased the cat that ate the chicken in the kitchen. When we say that language is arbitrary, The relationship between a word and its meaning is a matter of convention. Words have the meaning that they do have and occur in the order that they do just because the native speakers of the language agree to accept them as such. Say, for example, the animal called dog in English is called perro in Spanish, anjing in Malaysia, and aso in Filipino. In other words, arbitrary means that this certain thing doesn't have to have a logical basis, a logical reasoning behind it. The locals will just agree as to what the name of that word would be and they will accept it. Just like that. Language is productive or creative. This refers to the ability of the native speakers to understand and produce any number of sentences in their mother tongue. Now, in other words, when we speak, we produce sentences, we produce phrases that have meaning, which leads us to creativity. Language is a social phenomenon. It is a means of communication between individuals. It is also one of the things that brings them into relationship with their environment. Language is therefore a socially learned behavior, a skill that is required as we grow up in society. Now, it is considered a social phenomenon because when we use language, we interact with other people. All languages are equally complex. Each language is a part of the culture that produces it and is adequate for the needs of the people who use it. Now, it is wrong to say that this language is easier to learn than this other language. Now, all languages have certain complexity behind them. Moving forward to the elements of language. Now, we have four common elements in language: phonology, lexis or lexicon, grammar, and cultural load. Phonology is the study of sounds. Lexis or lexicon is the study of words and their meanings. Grammar is subdivided into three essential components: morphology, word formation; syntax, the arrangement of words in a sentence; and semantics, which refers to the meaning. And the fourth is the cultural load, the cultural component of a particular utterance, sentence, or discourse in a language. In phonology, we have this so-called phoneme. Phoneme is the smallest unit of sound that makes a difference of meaning in a language. There are two types of phonemes: segmental phonemes that includes vowels, consonant clusters, and diphthongs, and supramental phonemes that includes pitch, stress, intonation, and juncture. Under grammar, we have morphology. Now, morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. Now, it has two types: free morpheme and bound morpheme. A free morpheme can occur alone. For example, book, pencil, love, happy. Now, bound morpheme, on the other hand, cannot occur alone. For example, books. The S in books, where S expresses the plurality. Let's try to analyze these sentences here. Now, these sentences may differ in meaning or lexical meaning, but they do have the same grammatical meaning because they have the same arrangement of words in the sentences. Moving on to semantics. Now, semantics have something to do with the meaning of the words or a sentence. Now, let's take a look at the example sentence here. The shooting of the hunters occurred at dawn. Now, this sentence can have two meanings. The first meaning could be the hunters were shot at dawn. That means somebody shot the hunters at dawn. And the second meaning would be the hunters were shooting at dawn. They were hunters that shot something at dawn. This is only one sentence, but it can have multiple meanings. Now, that is semantics. It is apparent that culture as an ingrained set of behaviors and modes of perception, becomes highly important in the learning of a second language. A language is part of culture, and culture is part of language. The two are intricately woven so that we cannot separate the two without losing both their significance. What is language used for? Now, we will be talking about the general functions of language as given by Holliday, Jacobson, and Robinson. According to Michael Holliday, language is instrumental. Language allows speakers to get things done. Now, in this function, language is used as an instrument to be able to do things. This is called the I want function of language. The other microfunctions include naming, pronouncing, betting, suggesting, demanding, persuading, ordering, and commanding. Language is regulatory. Language is used to control events once they happen. This is called the do as I tell you function of language. Now, some of the microfunctions of language include disapproving, approving, answering the phone, setting rules, and addressing action. Another thing that Michael Holliday pointed out is that language is representational. Language is used to communicate knowledge about the world, to report events, make statements, give accounts, explain relationships, relay messages, and others. Now, this is called the I've got something to tell you function of language. Some of the microfunctions include reporting, explaining, relaying messages, informing or misinforming, telling lies, making statements. Interactional. Language is used to ensure social maintenance. In a wider sense, this function refers to all uses of language which helps to define and maintain groups. This is called as the you and me function of language. The microfunctions include greetings, leave takings, joking, teasing, parting, and accepting. Language is personal. Language is used to express the individual's personality. Individuals have a sense of voice in what happens to them. Now, this is called the here I come function of language. That includes exclaiming, endorsement, cursing, expressing anger, and apologizing. Heuristic. Language is used as an instrument itself in order to acquire knowledge and understanding. This is called the tell me why function of language, which includes questioning, probing, answering, arguing, concluding, defining, hypothesizing, analyzing, testing, experimenting. Finally, according to Michael Holliday, language is imaginative. Language is used to create imagining systems, whether these are literary works, philosophical systems, utopian visions on one hand, or daydreams and idle musings on the other. This is called let's pretend function of language. Moving on to Roman Jacobson's view on the functions of language. Firstly, he views language as cognitive or referential, which is used to convey messages. Secondly, conative, which is used to persuade and influence others through commands or entreaties. Next is emotive, which is used to express attitude, feelings, and emotions. Next is phatic, which means to establish a communion with others. And then metalingual, to clear up difficulties about intentions, words, and meanings. And lastly, he views language as poetic, which is used to indulge in language for its own sake. Now moving on to U.P. Robinson's view in the functions of language. Firstly, he views language as aesthetic, using language for literary creation. Secondly, ludic, rhyming, making up nonsense words, trying out possibilities of language as it is being learned, or joking. Third, regulation of encounters and human relations. This is using language to start, maintain, and end encounters. Fourth is regulation of others, using language to regulate the behavior and emotions of others, use of rules and expressions of obligations, commanding, requesting, threatening, criticizing, encouraging, persuading, inviting, giving permission, borrowing, and bargaining. Fifth is regulation of self, involving both behavior and emotion, talking to oneself, done either silently or alone, letting other people know what one uses, thinking, giving one's opinion, reasoning, and explaining. Sixth is self-expression, expressing one's own identity, personality, and feelings directly, using exclamation, using statements about feelings. Seven is marking social rules, using language to mark or express social role, relationship between people, address terms used when speaking to someone. Eight is a reference to non-linguistic world, discrimination, recognizing and expressing differences and similarities between things, organization, clarifying, and defining. Number 9 is instruction and teaching, using language to impart new information and skills. Number 10 is inquiring and speculation, wondering, finding out, asking for information and directions, imagining and supposing. And lastly, meta language, using language to talk about language itself. Now that we are done with the elements, the characteristics, and the function of language, let me introduce to you the terms that we might encounter on the next discussions by the next reporters. Now, let's go to first language, or L1. First language can also be referred to as native language, mother tongue, primary language, stronger language, and source language. While the second language, or L2, can be referred to as non-native language, foreign language, secondary language, weaker language, and or target language. As we go along our journey in language acquisition in the classroom, as a teacher, we should bear in mind the following considerations when teaching a child language. Firstly, a child learning his first language is strongly motivated because his needs and wishes are satisfied by the use of language, and his control of his environment and himself increases with his increasing mastery of his mother tongue. Secondly, the child is exposed to the first language all his waking hours, while he probably hears the second language only during class hours. Thirdly, as a child learns his first language, he is also learning the concepts, while in learning the second language, he seldom has to form new concepts. As I end this discussion, we must always remember that as a teacher, or as teachers, our understanding of the components of language will largely determine how we teach language. That is why it is very important to be equipped with the skills and knowledge that is necessary to be able to impart knowledge and skills to children.